Alright, I'm going to show you how to make gravy in this video. Gravy is a deceptively simple thing to make, but there are a few important tricks, and if you get them wrong, you're not going to have good gravy. It took me a while to figure this stuff out. The first thing you need to know is your proportions. There are three core ingredients to gravy. There is some kind of a fat, there is some kind of a grain or carbohydrate starch of some sort, and then there is some kind of a liquid. And in traditional breakfast gravy, at least, the fat is usually some kind of animal fat, like bacon grease or sausage grease or something like that. The starch is flour, and usually the liquid is milk. Now, when I make bacon throughout the week, I will often put the fat into one of these little 4-ounce mason jars. And I use bacon grease in part because it gives a lot more fat than does sausage, so it's easier to contain. These are 4 ounces in size, and when you get it to right about half full, that is enough to make a good batch of gravy for 2 people. The ratio that you want is a 1 to 1 to 8. So you want 1 part fat to 1 part of your grain or flour to 8 parts of your liquid, or in this case, my milk. 2 ounces of fat is a 1/4 cup, so when this is about half full, you've got 2 ounces, that's a 1/4 cup there. Then I've measured out a 1/4 cup of flour. In this container I've got really just under 2 cups of milk left in here. I'm going to say close enough, but if you're measuring, 2 cups to 1/4 to 1/4 is what you want. And then you'll also see, if you're looking in this skillet here, I've already melted the grease back into the skillet out of that container. And if you see the kind of weird bits looking in there, it's the seasonings I've added. So the usual common things are salt and pepper. I have also added some dried basil and some powdered onion. Let's watch what happens as we put these things together. And if you notice the timer going down in the background here, that timer is actually for the biscuits that are in the oven, because of course we're doing biscuits and gravy, why not? And we're going to use that timer to give us a good sense of how long does it take to make gravy, assuming you have all the conditions correct. So I said there were a few key secrets to making gravy. One of those is the proportion of your ingredients, which we've discussed. The other is that you need to have gravy on very high heat, and related, once you get going, you cannot stop whisking it or it will get very lumpy. It took me a long time to learn the piece about heat. If you don't have high enough heat going on, it's also going to take you forever to make your gravy, and it might never actually form. So don't be afraid to use some high heat. My stove, it's a gas stove, goes from a low to a high, which would be in the place of 7. I usually keep the heat somewhere just above the 4 marker. On the kind of medium to medium high side of things at least, and occasionally towards the end, if it's not thickening the way I want, in the last minute or two I'll bump it up just a little bit more, even up to a 5, just to really get it to hold together. So what we're going to do is, when it is time, and I want this to line up just before the biscuits need to come out of the oven, what we're going to do is we're going to use that timer there, and I'm going to time lapse the video to show how gravy will thicken and the amount of time that it takes. It generally takes me 5 to 7 minutes to get it up to where I really want it. You will notice as you're doing it that the gravy will thicken over time. You'll start to feel the difference. What you're really aiming for in the end is that it starts to reach a low boil that cannot be whisked down. So as you're stirring it, when you can stir away the boil, you're not quite there. When it keeps boiling and you can't stir that little bubbliness away, it's gotten to about as thick as it's going to get. We have about 11.5 minutes left for the biscuits, so I'm going to go ahead and get started with the gravy just to make sure it's ready a minute or two before, so I'm not rushing between the two. First step is to get the heat back on with our skillet. It's important to have your ingredients pre-measured before you get going. You want, because everything has to move quickly, you want it all to be ready to roll. So we've got our grease in there and our seasonings. I'm going to give it a little bit of a stir with the whisk here just to make sure everything's moving. And then we're going to sprinkle our flour kind of all around it. Now if I had waited a moment longer until it really got hot again, it would have sizzled as it hit. That's okay, we will get there quickly enough. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to whisk this flour in, and what I'm making is what's called a roux. It's spelled R-O-U-X. I'm making a roux here, and this is going to be the basis for a gravy. This is really the basis for any kind of a thick sauce that you might make. like if you make a cheese sauce for pasta to make your own mac and cheese, or even making like a really good Alfredo sauce, you're going to start with a base like this. You could actually take this gravy that I'm going to make, and you could throw a whole bunch of shredded cheese into it if you wanted, and melt the cheese in, and you would have a cheese sauce. It's going to be pretty cool. So once you learn this basic piece, it's very, very adaptable. You can put different seasonings in it. You could use different liquids. You could try it with different kinds of fats. You can use cornstarch instead of flour, but cornstarch you don't need nearly as much, and I'm not as sure of the proportions on that one, so just be careful that you don't over thicken it. But the idea holds across the board. All right, let's go ahead and add our milk. And especially if you already have it really hot, you want to be whisking as you add your milk slowly, and be careful, it could splash a bit. There we go. And you see the milk starting to bubble quickly on the edges as we add it. The milk's pretty cold, so it's going to change the temperature in the skillet pretty fast, and then it'll take a bit to come back up to the temperature we had, which is why you want to make sure things are already getting kind of hot before you start. At first, you're going to have little blobs of the roux kind of floating through. As long as you stir gently and just are consistent about it early on, you shouldn't have any lumps form right away. But if you wait too long to do that, you could have lumps form that will be very difficult, maybe even impossible to totally get out later. So if you don't want lumpy gravy, make sure you're stirring constantly. Okay, we're going to call it from 8 minutes as our beginning point. And now I'm going to move into the time-lapse part so you can see how this progresses over the next several minutes. And after barely a minute, we can already see some steam forming off the top. I don't know if that's coming through on the camera, but standing here, I can see the steam rising through here. To me, biscuits and gravy always scream weekend. They're a very special weekend treat for me in my house. And I usually only do them on either a Saturday or a Sunday. And usually only once, just because they're heavy food, right? But they're just such a treat, and they remind me a bit of my childhood, especially my grandmother. When I was a kid and we would go visit my grandparents, usually about like once a month or so, we would go up for the weekend and see them. And on Saturday morning, without fail, I remember always waking up to the smell of sausage frying downstairs in the kitchen, and my mama would be down there making up the sausage and then using all that sausage grease to make gravy, and she could make some amazing sausage gravy. And we would have sausage and gravy and biscuits for breakfast, and it was just one of the highlights for me. So we're 3 minutes in, and it's starting to thicken up nicely. You know, food can be like that. Food really does just bring so many memories. Hopefully good memories for many of us, maybe sometimes not good memories, but food is just such a way of expression of so many things. Memory, culture, identity, and of course, health and nutrition. Okay, we are at about 6 minutes in on this, and though it's not really bubbling super vigorously, I can feel it being so thick that I don't think it's going to get much thicker than this. Part of what you can also tell is, if you sort of look at the skillet, you see how as I stir, like I see spots of the skillet, it stays open. It's thick enough that it kind of holds some shape. That is also a very good sign that you are pretty much where you're going to be. And it'll thicken a little bit more as it cools. So I think we're going to go ahead and cut the heat. Stir it just a touch more. Because when you let it sit, it also starts to form a weird film on top. It's not bad for you, it's a little weird. I like to mix that back in because I don't find it super appetizing personally. Even though I know it's totally fine. That is some good, thick gravy. Yes. All right, we'll let that sit for a minute, and then in a moment we will pull the biscuits out of the oven. And here we are with the final plate of biscuits and gravy. Oh, look at that beautiful plate. Now my mama, she would often break up some of the sausage and put it in with the gravy, so there'd be little chunks of sausage in there too. Sometimes I do that, but I didn't make sausage. And to kind of give you an idea, like as it sits, it thickens up even more, so you can sort of see like what that looks like now from the skillet. Hope you enjoy making some of this. Like I said, one of my favorite weekend breakfasts.